In the last class, we had discussed about what is ASP.NET and how to work with, or just a brief introduction into what is ASP.NET. That's what we saw. Now, in today's class, I'm going to go a little bit more in depth into the theory part of ASP.NET, and towards the end, we'll see a small demo of what we stopped in the last class. So, in today's session, I need to tell a few things. Let's say, for the first thing is you need to see what are the different development models available in ASP, and then we'll jump into the life cycle, and with that today's session will stop, and then we will see the demo if time permits. Anyway, there are different development models available from Microsoft under the tag called active server pages, ASP. So I just want to tell you what are the ways or various things which are available inside ASP. The number one thing is classic ASP. Okay, when I say classic, this is the old or the first ever server-side technology given from Microsoft, and it's still working. It's still available for a lot of websites which have been developed with this. I'll be showing that after the presentation is over. Okay, so that is classic ASP, and then what we are learning now is ASP.NET. In that ASP.NET, you have web pages, web forms, MVC. That's what we are going to cover, and then extra ones are ASP.NET API and as well as .NET Core. Okay, so these are the development models available. Okay, this is the last part are not in syllabus, but I just wanted to know this. Okay, there is classic ASP, which is before .NET framework came into picture. It was the first one ever, and then you have web pages, web forms, MVC, which is there in our syllabus, which is what we are going to see. And API and core, core has actually involved everything into one part. So .NET ASP.NET Core is the recent version of ASP which has come to us. But then basically, please note that without learning ASP or not ASP, ASP.NET, okay, without understanding the working of a Microsoft technology, directly jumping into .NET Core might not be a very valid suggestion. Okay, let me just take each one of them into introspect, and let's see what are the things about these individual development models. Number one is classic ASP. Okay, it is called as ASP. Otherwise, we normally call it as classic ASP because it's the old version. Okay, it was introduced in '98. It's a very pretty old way of developing, but it was the Microsoft's first server-side scripting language. Okay, you should understand that it is not with .NET, it is just the word ASP. It was in '98 and it is first server-side technology available from Microsoft. Okay, they have the file extension of .asp. All right, there are some websites which are using it. I think most of you would have used the website called W3 Schools. Okay, if you go to W3 Schools and see the extension, the file extension on the URL, you'll see that almost all pages have .asp as their extension because that website is developed with classic ASP. Okay, and they are normally written in a scripting language called VB script. Okay, please understand that it's not the one which you're thinking as a client side. It also works with server side technologies. All right, but anyway, ASP works with .asp as extension, and it is normally written in VB script. I'll just show you a simple code how ASP looked like. Okay, if you see that side, wherever you see less than percentage, all right, just like how PHP works, wherever you, or JSP works, wherever you would like to bring in server side or some scripting language, you would bring another tag. Okay, here if you see the first line is less than percentage at, which is nothing but a directive which says language is equal to VB script and something extra, and then you have option explicit. These are all VB based code. Option explicit, option imports, all those things are there. All right, so response dot character set, and then if you see in the middle, body of the tag is less than percentage equal to. Okay, that is used to print something out as a string. That's why it's put hello world there, and it works. This is classic ASP. All right, but what we are going to learn is not going to be like this, and primarily we are going to use C# as the language, not VB. So let me continue. Next part, from ASP, this classic ASP, we are moving on to ASP.NET. Now, when it comes to ASP.NET, it gives you 3-4 ways of creating a web page. Okay, the first one is something called ASP.NET Web Page. I want you to focus on the word which I'm using, page. Okay, it is just like a single page application. Okay, web pages are normally a single page application where you don't have much of processing in the server side, but or rather you can think like how a PHP page would work. Okay, a PHP page would be basically written in HTML. Inside that, you would write wherever you want PHP. You will include it, or you'll just insert it wherever it is required. Not the entire page. You will be writing it in PHP. You will similarly as JSP. You will write as much as HTML as possible. When there is programming or processing required, you will bring in JSP or PHP. That same idea, if you want to use that kind of an idea in .NET, you still have something called web pages, but nobody will recommend this, okay? Because a single page application, maybe if your page is mostly static and little bit dynamic functionalities are there, then you would bring in a single page application or a web page in general. Okay, web forms and MVC, which we are going to see in our syllabus, are hard for PHP developers, okay, or newcomers, those who are coming into this technology for the first time after developing with PHP and JSP. They might find it difficult for suddenly starting with web forms. That is why they have this concept called web pages, but it is not at all recommended when you come into .NET framework. Okay, so simpler approach to ASP.NET development was needed, and web pages was the result. How do I make it simpler? It is just think of it like classic ASP or PHP. Those who have done PHP will understand. Those who have worked with PHP, if you would like to do .NET, okay, if you would like to write C# code using ASP.NET, then this would bring a little bit more perspective for you, because you write the server-side code in the same page as the HTML code. I hope you get the flow. Alright, so that is ASP.NET web pages. I will not focus much on this. We will be actually working on the next concept, web forms. Okay, that is what we are going to work with. Web forms lets you to build dynamic websites using drag and drop. Okay, those who have worked with VB.NET, you know how you developed a desktop application. You would just drag and drop controls, you'll double click on it, you'll start writing code, a design will be there, and then you'll have code. Same idea is followed in ASP.NET web forms. Web pages is not like that. Web forms is like that. Okay, it's an event driven model. When you double click, it gives you something, and then you click on it and then write some code. Okay, so everything will be familiar for those who have done VB.NET. Same idea. And it also enables you to think your form as a unit, not as a separate client server piece. Okay, it just thinks every page as a separate unit, like a control itself. Okay, and a design surface which has hundreds of controls. You can even add more controls which are not available in Visual Studio, and allows you to have components. That word I wanted to remember, components. It allows you to rapidly build UI driven data, okay, sites with data access. Okay, remember this. It's easy. We'll see that shortly. The next one is ASP.NET MVC. Okay, in the last, I think the third semester when you studied Java, we had also given this idea of model, view, and controller. Okay, everything in its own file. Don't put everything into one. And when will you bring MVC? You will bring it when you have a complicated application, not to write hello world or adding two numbers or something. We can give you an example with adding two numbers in MVC, but then nobody would do this. Okay, MVC is meant to make sure that your complex project is made simpler by giving the work into different pieces. I hope you know the full form of MVC. M stands for model, V stands for view, and C stands for controller. Model, view, controller, model. Okay, so MVC is a design pattern used to decouple, which means divide user interface, data, and the logic. Okay, this is the idea. And this allows you to separate concerns. Each concern is in its own place, so that you need not bother about everything in one place. You can just go, if you want to change the design, you only change the design part, not the logic. The logic is still the same. Okay, and here in MVC, normally request will be given to the controller. Controller will be responsible to work with the model, the data model, and to perform actions or to retrieve or display or edit or whatever it is you want to do. Okay, and the controller will choose which view to show to you based on what you are requesting, and it gives you with the model. And the view finally shows that data to the user based on the data in the model. And this is like a cycle which we will be seeing in the last unit. But please remember, MVC is part of ASP.NET. Now all these merged has become .NET Core. Okay, and ASP.NET API is nothing but, you know what's an API, right? Application Programming Interface. Writing a block of code and keeping it so that people can reuse it again and again. Okay, you can give that as an API. and it is being now merged into the new ASP.NET Core. Okay, and Core was released in 2016, 4 years back, but it was in development phase. But please just think that those who have developed websites before 2016 were still in ASP.NET. Okay, .NET Core is people who are right now creating applications, and they're merging or converting it back, or migrating it back to .NET Core. Okay, and it merges MVC, Web API, web pages, everything into one application framework, ASP.NET Core. Okay, in order to understand ASP.NET Core, you need to have a little bit of idea, or at least a clear idea about ASP.NET MVC. So in order to lead to that, we are learning all these things. Okay, and not all companies have shifted to .NET Core. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Okay, so it's important for you to learn. Maybe if you're going for an internship right now, most of the companies would still be using ASP.NET framework. Okay, so in that case, it's better to know this. And if it is ASP.NET Core, which is what they are using, you will not find it difficult to migrate to .NET Core, because you have a clear idea of how ASP.NET works. Okay, so that is one. Let me just fix this. The next part, what we are going to see, or what you're supposed to see in the theory part of ASP.NET, is the life cycle. Okay, now this is theory part, guys. I hope you follow that. I'll just quickly finish this life cycle, and then we'll go to the working of it. Okay, in ASP.NET, the life cycle is now divided. Please understand, this is not a desktop application, it's a web application. Okay, when I say ASP, automatically it becomes a web application, not a desktop application. If I just use the word VB.NET, if I just use the word C#.NET, then you understand that it is maybe a console application, maybe a desktop application. But when I say ASP.NET, I'll have to attach a language along with it, a programming language. I'll say ASP.NET with C#, ASP.NET with VB, whatever you choose. Okay, but life cycle is common. It's just an idea. All right, so it specifies how ASP.NET processes pages to give you that dynamic output. Okay, it's just going to tell you, this life cycle will tell you the steps in which it works, and normally we use it purely for theoretical purposes. But then at some scenarios, you might require one or two of those methods into your program also, like how you learned activity life cycle. Okay, you need to know when these things are triggered to use those lifecycle methods appropriately. Here, it is not that much important to know the lifecycle method, but then for theory, it is compulsory. But for real world applications, one or two of these life cycles are very important. Remaining can be ignored. Okay, but anyway, let us just go through all these things quickly. First thing is, it processes pages to give you how it processes the pages to give you that dynamically produced output. Number one. Number two, and it specifies the application and its pages are instantiated, how they are instantiated and processed. That also will be discussed in life cycle. Third one, how ASP.NET compiles the pages dynamically. These things are given in life cycle, but please note there is a small difference between these life cycles. Okay, there are two types of life cycles or two groups of life cycles in ASP.NET. Number one is the application lifecycle. Number two is the page lifecycle. Okay. Now, before I proceed to the further slides, I wanted to understand something very clearly here. In the last semester, I think not last and before that, Java, when you dealt with Java web application, you create a web application. Okay, you create a Java web application in NetBeans, and then you get a project which has index.html. You will change that to index.jsp, or maybe you will write that index.jsp to call a servlet. Like that, you had done a lot of things. Now, if you remember the program where we did, let's say, CRUD operation, you would have created at least 4 pages: index.jsp, insert.jsp, update.jsp, delete.jsp. You have different JSP files. Now, please note, each and every JSP file which you had is a page, but the application which you created, okay, would be like a folder. Okay, that entire thing would be under a web.xml. I hope you get the flow. Okay, application is that full-fledged var file or the jar file which you give to a particular client. Okay, but then individually inside that, the for example, the CRUD operations you have done is one application, but it has 4 pages. I hope you get the words difference there. Okay, I wanted to understand that those two words, because we are going to see two life cycles. One is the application life cycle, the other one is the page life cycle. What is application? What is a page? If I'm developing a web application, All right, it is not how many pages I have. It is one application. Inside that I might have n number of pages, but one application. Okay, like that I can have any number of I can develop a shopping cart application, as well as I can develop let's say a college website, whatever it is. But I'm putting it in the same domain. I can use it in the same domain as well. All right, so that is something, application and lifecycle. Let's go a little bit in depth. I hope you got the difference between what is an application here. I'm not talking about a desktop application or a mobile application. Here it is a web application. Okay, in that web application there are different pages and each of them have a life cycle. Let's discuss one by one. So let's start with the application life cycle. I hope you can see the screen in this. You have this is the application life cycle in general or in a shorter form. Okay, every website would have a different way of giving the life cycle to you, but then I think this is more than enough to learn the words which are here. Application start, object creation, application HTTP application creation, dispose, application ends. So start and end is there. In between there are only three things. One, object creation, and then what are the objects which are created, which we need to see now, and then HTTP application. Every app which you are deploying onto the server will be considered as one application, and for every application which is, for example, I have hosted a website and n number of people are accessing it. Everybody is seeing an object of that application, not the application itself. I hope you can get this. Okay, if HTTP application is a class, what I am accessing, what I am actually interacting with, it will be an object only. So if I have 1,000 people visiting my website, all those 1,000 people are seeing an instance of my HTTP application object. Okay, let me go a little bit in depth of that. These are the 5 stages in that application lifecycle. Let's see one by one quickly. Number 1, application start. What and all happens in this particular phase? The life cycle of an ASP.NET application starts when a request is made by the user. Okay, please understand this. I didn't say page lifecycle starts. Page also will start slowly because you will have to access one by one in that. Now, when will an application start? When you call some page in that application. Now, when you, for example, the same CRUD application which we have taken, imagine if you have given the name as JSP CRUD and you're running that application. The first file which will be called from that will be index.jsp. Okay, it doesn't matter which file is getting called, but rather you should see a little bit broader picture that application is called first. Okay, when a request is made by the user, what will be the user requesting? Localhost/JSP CRUD. If you are calling this is your request, you are raising it through a browser and then the request is raised. Okay, this is, I think this step is clear. When this happens, the life cycle begins. Okay, this happens when the first user, please understand, application is starting only when the first user normally goes to the home page for the first time. This is, I think I've repeated this again in JSP as well as in Servlet. When the first time the user is requesting a page, the application is called. The next time the user requests that page, application is not called once again because it's already loaded onto memory. So it will be called directly from the memory. I hope you get the flow. But this phase of the life cycle, application life cycle, application start phase, will be only called the first user normally goes to the home page for the first time. Okay, that's the first phase. And then during this time, there is a method called application_start, which is there in your web server. Okay, by the way, please remember there is only one web server possible here. When we were learning JSP servlet, there were different web servers possible, like you had Apache, you had Glassfish, you have Tomcat, you have WebLogic. There are a lot of web servers possible, but when it comes to .NET, that is clarified here. There is only one web server which is working in ASP.NET, which is IIS. Okay, so remember that. And during this time, there is a method called which is executed by the web server. When I say web server, I will not be using the word IIS again. Understand that it is IIS. Okay, and in this method, all the variables which are required for your entire applications are initialized to its default values. This is the first step of application lifecycle. What happens second? Object creation. What are the objects required to be created? Let's just go through that. The next stage is creating HTTP. Please note the 3 objects that are getting created. HTTP context. Okay, and inside that you have HTTP request and HTTP response. We have come across these 2 keywords also in Java. Okay, if you remember servlet has two methods called do get and do post. In both those methods, do get and do post, within brackets there are two parameters passed: HTTP request, HTTP response. Okay, same thing here. But there we would be using the word HTTP servlet request, HTTP servlet response. Idea is still the same. Okay. And that HTTP context, as I just said, context is just the container for request as well as response objects to be put. That's all. And the request object, what it contains, I think you understand the remaining two: request and response. What does request object contain? It contains information about the current request, like including cookies and the browser information, etc., etc. If you remember, I told this: when you send a request, when you type something and you press enter in the browser, okay, what the browser does is it goes and searches its cookies folder, cache folder, and sees if that copy has already been created. If it is created and if the cookie exists with that particular data, it sends all those informations to the server. But when it comes to a new request, there is no cookie, there's nothing information, so it goes as a new request. But if it already exists, it passes all in that request object, okay, including cookies and browser information. So what would be the response object contain? It contains the response, what is generated from the server to the browser. Okay, it's just containing all these things. We have not still printed out. It's just object creation, second phase. Third phase, application creation. HTTP application. Please note that is a class name. HTTP application, capital H, capital A. Okay, it's a class name which is getting created. If you are creating a class, you cannot actually create a class. Class is already there. So what am I basically creating there? I'm creating an object. Okay, this object is created by the web server, which is used to process subsequent requests sent to that same application. Okay, here it's a little bit tricky for you to follow. HTTP application object. For every application, there is one object. I hope you follow. This object is created by the web server, which is used to process each and every following request. For example, the first user request, a response goes. Second user request, the same object has to respond to that application. So that is what we are doing. I've just given an example. If you have two web applications, one is shopping cart, the other one is a news website, but both are in the same domain. IIS server is processing it. Okay, so for shopping cart, there will be one application object created. For the news website, there will be one more application object created. For each application, we would have, each application, we would have one application object created. Okay, so for any further request to each website will be processed by each of those HTTP application object respectively. I hope this is clear for the application itself. Okay, I'm still in application lifecycle. The last and the fourth and the fifth one might be when you are removing it, or when you are undeploying it from, or removing it from your server. Okay, dispose. This event is called before the application instance is destroyed. Okay, and during this time you can use this method to manually release any of the unmanaged resources. The last one is the application end. Basically, what is application load and what is application end? When do you call an application being started? When it is loaded onto memory. Okay, it's not only web application, any application for that sake, web application, mobile application, desktop application. When you load this onto the memory, when I say memory, I'm talking about RAM. When you load it onto the memory, it is getting started. And when you remove it from memory, it is ended. So this is the final part of the application end. In this part, it is unloaded from memory. That's all. This is a simple ASP.NET application lifecycle methods. Okay, so these are the lifecycle of ASP.NET application. So what is next for us? This is for a full application. Once it is getting called, and then a subsequent request will be to that application. That one application can have n number of pages. Now, in what we have discussed is only that application part. In that application, you have many pages. For each page, there is a life cycle. That's what we're going to discuss next. Page life cycle. Okay, so let's see the page life cycle. It is a little bit more than application life cycle, because application is just loaded. Inside that application, all other pages are getting called. So page request, because for example, imagine if you're opening Facebook for the first time. It will take you to login.php if you have not logged in. But if you have already logged into Facebook and you're going to facebook.com again, it doesn't take you to login.php, it takes you to home.php. Now, application is called as Facebook. but you have different pages inside that. You have profile page, you have news page, you have events page, you have different pages inside that. I'm just taking 2 or 3 examples. Let's say login and home. Login.php is a separate page inside that Facebook application. Home.php is another page inside that application. I hope you get the words difference. Okay, so if I'm requesting for a particular page, let's say I'm requesting for home.php. Page starts, page initializes, post back event handling is happening, validates it, the page is loaded, page is rendered, and then it comes out of your location. But then please note, we don't see any of these. These are all happening in the server side. What you are seeing is page rendering. It just renders the page to you and you see the output. Okay, but let's go through each and every method a little bit more in depth as the lifecycle part. So first one, page request. Okay, how do you request a page? Just type that URL and press enter. If you just type facebook.com, enter, what are you trying to call? You're basically trying to call index.php, and in index.php basically it takes you to home, which means your profile page. But if you have not logged in, it takes you to login. So the first thing what you do is page request. Let's do that. What happens when you click on page request? It is when the page is requested first time from the server. Please note, first requested from the server. When the page is requested, server checks if it is requested for the first time. Okay, I want you to understand this is not for an application. This is just for a single page. Okay, now remember, whatever I'm going to tell in the next few slides are going to happen just like that. Okay, it's not going to happen so slow as I'm telling. But when you're executing, it just executes in within a fraction of a second. But let's just slow down and see what is happening in each of those. The first time, let's say for example, I've deployed an application and I'm asking you to check it. The first time you request, that page is being called from the server for the first ever time. Okay, so when the page is requested, the server checks if it is the first time. If it is, then it will compile that page, because you know that we have C# also along with that page. We might have written server side code in that. I'll show that shortly. All this needs to be compiled. Also, that ASPX page must be parsed to convert it into HTML. Okay, all these needs to be done and then sent it to the user. And if it is not the first time, okay, please note, if it is the first time, you have to compile it, you have to parse it, then give you the output. But if it is not the first time, then there will be something called cache, which I showed in the last class, if you remember. Okay, and cache needs to be checked to see if that page output exists. If the page output already exists and there is no change, why should I compile and run it once again? I'll just show you the output as it is. So if that is so, the response is sent to the user from this point. Okay, the request is the first time the page is requested, and it checks in this place itself. It checks whether it is the first time or the second time or the subsequent time. Okay, that's the first step. Second step, page start. Okay, please consider each and every page in your ASP.NET application as a class. Okay, please consider everything, and it is a class. That's what I want you to understand. If it is a class, whatever you are interacting with here will not be a class, it will be an object, which means whatever we see in Visual Studio is a class. Okay, so page, consider them as a class. During this time, 2 objects known as the request and response objects are created when the page starts. Every page has those 2 objects. Please remember that. Same thing in JSP, same thing in PHP as well as in ASP, because we are developing or we are dealing with web technology. This is not going to change. Request and response. Okay, there are 2 objects which are created. Request, as it is, it holds all the information what the user is giving. Okay, whatever the user is asking is called as a request, and whatever the server is giving back is called as a response. No big difference in that. It's still the same. Third one, page initialization. Please note there are 2 different, or maybe I've used 3 different words. Starting with the first one was page request, second one is page start, third one is page initialization. Okay, in this time, all the controls on your page are initialized. Now, please remember, what do I mean by a control? Let's say button, let's say a text box. Okay, in HTML, they are basically tags, controls we can call them, but there are 2 types of controls. This is what we are going to see different here in .NET. There will be server-side controls and client-side controls. I'll show them shortly now, but then remember, okay, during this time, all the controls on your web page are initialized. And if you have any label, text box, any control, they are initialized in this particular page lifecycle method. all things are initialized. Next one, page load. All right, what is happening? This is when it is loaded. When I say load, basically I'm trying to tell it is loaded with all the default values onto your memory. Okay, so if a text box is supposed to have a default value, that value is also loaded and it is kept on memory, so that when you access it, you'll see that default value. The fifth one is validation. Okay, now it's a very important phase. It's a very important concept also for us. What do you mean by validation? Checking. Okay, check if everything is proper. When you send some data back to the client, you need to make sure that whatever data you are sending is valid. It cannot be like, for example, if you have told a list box or a text box should have these values when before it goes to the client, you should check that. And if anything is wrong, you should not send that page to the user. And also you would have come across something called 500 error, server 500. If something goes wrong in the server, page should not come. It should give you a 500 error saying that there is server problem. Okay, so you should tell what kind of error you have got. And if that file does not exist, none of this will come. Directly validation file not exist, 404. Okay, validation. Basically, it's very important. Sometimes there can be validation set on the form. That's what I just told now. Okay, the last thing is, if it is successful, if the validation is successful, there is a property, it's a small property kept in every page of .NET called isValid. Okay, if isValid is true, then the page is rendered. If there is false, page will not be rendered. .NET will give you a different page. I'll show that as we develop. Okay, please remember isValid property, validation phase. The next one is post-back event handling. Now, if you are noting down something, okay, I wanted to remember this because I'll be asking it towards, let's say, middle of our program later. Okay, when we start the databases, I'll be asking that word, what we are seeing right now, post-back. Okay, I wanted to understand this, post-back event handling. What do you mean by a post-back? Okay, I wanted to understand this. This event, post-back, is triggered if the same page is being loaded again. I hope I'll pause just for you to understand. This is important. Okay, post back is an event which is triggered if the same page is being loaded once again. Now, what about a scenario like, for example, you click on a submit button and you don't want to go to another page. You want to process it in the same page, which means you are submitting this form to the same page, which means you're calling that same page again, but with different data. That time, that thing is called as post back. Can you remember this, guys? Please do remember this. Okay. Post-back event handling is triggered if the same page is being loaded once again. Now, this happens in response to an earlier event. This doesn't, post-back never happens for the first time, because please note the event says if it is triggered the second time, the same page is being loaded once again, then we call it as post-back. It happens as a response to a previous event. Okay, but still part of your page life cycle. Sometimes there might be a situation when you click on the button and you want the result in the same page, not to another page. Okay, that time you use this. Same page is displayed again. In such a case, a post-back event handler is called. Okay, this is not called when the page is called the first time. I want you to understand this very clearly. First time when you call the page, it is not called post-back. But if you're calling that same page once again programmatically, then it is called post-back. If you are refreshing the page, it is not called post-back. This is the difference I want you to understand. You go on the URL and you press F5, that is not called post-back, that is refreshing. Post-back is something which you click and programmatically trigger to call the same page once again. That is post-back. Can you remember this? Okay, so let me proceed. Last one, or this is the page, this is the phase in the life cycle where you are seeing the data. The page is actually rendered to the client. This happens just before all the response information is sent to the user, and all information from the form is saved. Whatever you have done, the server records that and then sends it as a complete web page. Please remember, whatever goes back to the client cannot be in, even one letter cannot be with respect to C# or ASPX. Whatever goes back from the server should be pure HTML. Complete web page must be given back to the user. So that is one more important thing, page rendering. The last one is unload. Okay, what do you mean by unload? When the page is sent to the user, no need to keep that object memory or those objects in memory, but rather that object will be kept in cache. I hope you get the difference. Okay, objects are not kept in memory because that page has been rendered. Now anymore, next time you request that page, I'll remove it from cache and give, not from memory. Because if I keep all, for example, if I have 1,000 pages in my application, if I keep all 1,000 pages in the memory, it might be slower. So I'll be keeping it in cache memory, and I'll load it or retrieve it whenever it is required. So unload, basically after the output is sent to the user, which means you are now seeing the output, server has removed it from memory. When you refresh, it is called again, but if the same thing is called, it will remove from cache. If it is a different thing called, it will take it from the beginning. Okay, this is the idea of a page lifecycle. So the unloading process involves removing all unwanted objects from memory, so that your web server is always efficient to serve something immediately. Okay, I've just kept it. This is the last thing. These are the individual life cycle events which are happening. I didn't want to go so in depth, so that's why I kept this in one slide, so that I just want you to remember the words which are given here. Okay, init, when I said page initialization, inside that there are three more smaller events. The actual event is called pre-init, init, init complete. Okay, even in initialization you have three different phases. Like that, they have broken down the lifecycle event to so minute things so that you can decide what should happen in each of these phases. Then you see load. You have preload, load, load complete. After that loading is done, validation, control events. Okay, all these things, event control like postback. And then rendering, rendering to the user. Again there, pre-render complete, save the state of the page that is complete, then render. The last one is unload. Okay, this is what you see in this right hand side with lifecycle event are those actual events. I gave you an overview of the stages, but there is lifecycle events happening which are minute details, but then idea is still the same. You can write on top of this, so not a problem. So with this, we'll stop with the theory part. Let's get into I'll just the last 10 minutes I'll just give you a demo of how to simply use ASP.NET to develop a web application. Let's do that now. I'm going to open the same application which I did in the last class, Hello ASP. If you remember in the last class, what we did was we created a simple web application, an empty web application. I'm going to continue working with that empty web application for the first few classes. Okay. Later, I'll not use this at all. We'll be using that web forms, which will have a template already ready for you. Okay, let me just begin. So here in the last class, what I did was I just went to the design and I just typed that hello world from ASP.NET in the design phase. Yes, I only did this much. Okay, but now today what we will be seeing is, by the way, please note when I added this project, if you remember the keyword what I used was when I right click on the project and say add, please note the item what I have used as the keyword. Web forms. Okay, I have not used a web page, rather I've used something called web forms, and I added a web form. Please note the keyword, that's what I discussed today. A web form is the dynamic version which has design separately and code separately. Okay, let me come back. Now I just want you to see and get the idea of this. This is just a simple page, just like your PHP page. Okay, one difference is that in PHP, if I'm writing, let's say for example, I'll do a simple application like an adding two numbers today, just for our understanding. But before that, let me just tell you how do I develop an application here in .NET. By the way, this is still a web application, which means Bootstrap, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, whatever you have learned will not go waste here. It is still going to be used. Okay, it is exactly a web application. One difference is that we do not use we don't write the same in the same page. We don't write the entire code in the same page. Rather, we write design in one page and code in another page. I hope you get the flow here. But anyway, with that, let me just go to the design See, I already have some data. Let me just delete it. Let me keep a blank page, and I'll go to the place called Toolbox. Those who have done VB, you would have seen this kind of atmosphere where you have a toolbox here, okay, on the left hand side, and you can drag and drop controls onto the screen. I am going to just discuss about some of the controls in toolbox now. We will use as much as possible, because there is no way I can use all the controls in that toolbox. We'll use it as and when we require it. Okay, now let me just go and focus on that. Let me just minimize all the types of controls which are available. Okay, now please note, these are the what do you call, sections of controls available in ASP.NET. Now, standard, we can just see there are standard controls. Let's not get into that. You have HTML controls. Please note that. You can even use a HTML control, which you can just drag and drop and make it as HTML based application. Okay, but then if you use standard, there'll be a small difference. I want you to understand this very clearly. These controls, which are standard controls, which belong to .NET, you can see the label there, which says it is .NET component. Okay, these are all controls from .NET. I'll tell you how they are different, but just have a note of this. Okay, there are a lot of controls like label, you have button, you have text box, and then you have a drop down list, you have checkboxes, checkbox list, and then you have link button, like a hyperlink, and also you should have radio button list, table, like that. Lot of things are available in the toolbox for ASP.NET. Now also there are data based controls. Okay, we'll get into them slowly. There are validation controls, which is again a part of our syllabus. You have navigation controls, sorry, and then you have login, you have web paths, you have Ajax controls, you have dynamic controls, you have normal HTML controls. Now, we will start working with small applications so that we can get a look and feel and just an idea of ASP.NET. Okay, so what I'm going to do today, I'm going to create a simple application, a web application using ASP.NET in order to add two numbers. Okay, now I would like you to picturize or understand and tell me how to do that same application using PHP. Okay, how I would have written a program using PHP to add two numbers. Okay, what should I do first? Can you guys give me an answer? I hope you got my question. I want to add two numbers using PHP. Okay, not using JavaScript, just PHP. I want to add two numbers. How am I supposed to proceed with respect to a PHP application to add two numbers? Anyone? No one knows how to use PHP to add two numbers? How am I supposed to start? Anyone?
To take variables from from the user.
Now, how do I begin? Guys, you need not type. If you want, you can just unmute yourself and then speak also. Not a problem. Okay, fine. Let me just...
Books.
Yeah?
Text box.
Xbox.
Yeah, to take the input.
Text box. Okay. Fine. First, what we would do is we would put two text boxes to take the input from the user. Correct? So I'll be asking enter first number and I'll put a text box. And then I'll say enter second number, put a text box. And then I put submit and reset button. Okay. And then what else? When you click on submit, what would I do? First of all, you should put everything inside a form, right? That I hope everybody remembers. You have to put a form tag. Inside that you have input type equal to text. Let's say name equal to first, and then input type equal to text, name equal to second, input type equal to submit, input type equal to reset. You'll create a simple web application. Okay. When you click on submit, I want you to take these two numbers and then give me the output, print the output. Okay. There are two ways in which you can do it. If you remember, one, you can submit that form to the same page, to the same PHP file itself, take the numbers if the request is post or get or whatever you have, and then you take that input from the user and submit to the same page. Or I can also write, for example, I can write a separate file called result.php, And when you click on the submit button, I'm going to take you to result.php. So you'll write form action is equal to result.php, and then you'll write method equal to get or post, whatever you like, and then you write these HTML part. So one page will be purely HTML, index.html. Another page you will have result.php. You click on index.html, you submit this page, I'll take you to result.php, which will take the two numbers, add it, and print it to you. This is what we'll be doing. But here in .NET, we don't need to do that. Okay, you need not bother about submitting to the same page or another page. You can handle everything in the same page itself, because the page itself is divided into two. Okay, so it's easy for us to design and deploy. So now let's take adding two numbers. How do you want to do this? First, let's finish the design part. Okay, so I want to finish the design phase, and then I'll go to the code phase. Okay, the design phase is very simple. I want to keep a simple page in which I want to take user input. I don't want to keep it normally, but I want to keep it in a decent table. Okay, so in order to do that, I want you to, this is the design phase, guys, not a problem, but I also want you to see the source part so that you understand something here. Okay, so let me just begin. See, inside the body tag, I am going to drag and drop a few controls. Okay, so let me go to the standard control, and let me just drag and drop a table, because I want a table structure. Okay, so let me just drag and drop a table. Now, please note, I have not put any form tags here. I just dragged and dropped a table. I got something there. Some code is there. Let me just not get into that right now. Let me go to HTML, and let's see, there is also a table there. I hope you can see that. There is a table in HTML control, and also there is a table in standard control. I'm going to just drag and drop both to show you the difference. Okay. So here I'm going to, let me put the next line. I'll just drag and drop this table. Now, I wanted to just see this both code and see what is the difference between these two. Okay, the first one, what you see here is an ASP colon control. This is not a HTML control. I hope you can follow. Okay, I'll show the other examples also. But this is something which is very familiar to us, table, HTML table. It's a normal HTML table. Now I'll go to the design and show you how they both have come out. Okay. I hope you can see that small lines here. This one which you see here is my .NET ASP.NET table, which is not showing anything except for some hash symbols. This is an ASP table. You will have to manipulate data there. Okay, it will not automatically come like a simple data which will hold there. So I'm going to just keep it there, and then this is your TD, your HTML table. Okay, so let me go to the source again. You can see this is something which we are very much familiar with, table tag. But this is not something which is familiar for us, because this is a .NET control. Okay, you can see that one extra example is this. If you see this tag in any of those tags which you are going to come across, you should understand that it is not a client side control. This control or this tag, what you see, will be running at server, and then it will come back to client as a normal table. Okay, so let me just take that example. Apart from the table, let me just take something else. Here. In this HTML control, you see there is something called a button, submit button, okay, or just input type button, whatever it is. Let me just take input type equal to submit. I'm going to just drag and drop a submit button. Okay, this is something which is very familiar to us. Input type equal to submit, value equal to submit, whatever it is. Okay, now I'm going to the standard control, and I'm going to drag and drop a button from there also. So let me just drag and drop a button. Okay, now you see it's not the same. Both are buttons. If I go to the design, both would look almost the same. They both look the same. Only thing is the text is different. But then I wanted to notice that thing here. They both look ASP colon, they both look like a button, but one says ASP colon button. The other one is an input ID. So now when I run this particular program, what will happen? Okay, just picturize what would happen. First line, when the web server goes through this line, you have also told one thing is run at server. That's secondary. But as soon as this tag starts, you understand that this is not a HTML tag. Okay. If it is a HTML tag, I need not translate it or parse it. But if it is a ASP.NET tag, then you will have to parse it. Okay. Remember this. And one more thing you have extra told is run at server. So which means this tag will run at the server and will give you a response as HTML. Okay, remember that. And see, right now I have two buttons here. Done. My work here is simple. I've finished it. But let's just come to our actual program. Let's develop or design a simple page to add two numbers. Okay. For that, I would like to keep a table so that I can keep my labels and stuff properly. So I'm just going to drag and drop a table onto my design. So I get something like this. Okay, there are 3 rows and 3 columns. I hope you can see this. There are 3 rows and 3 columns. The code is also generated like that. Table, tr, inside each tr there is 3 tds, and then like that there are 3 trs. Okay, let me just open the full source. You can see there are 3 rows and each row has 3 data. Okay, that's all. Now let me go to the design so that it's easier for us. So I'm not going to bother about the first one. I'll just type. I'm not bothered about the design here, guys. We'll see that in the next class onwards. Here, just to get the idea here, I'm going to say enter first number. Okay. In the second TD, what you want there, okay, by the way, I don't recommend dragging it, or I don't even recommend putting a HTML table. You should use div tags. Okay, we'll do design part later. I just wanted to make sure that this is clear. Okay, now here in this part, I need a text box. So I'm going to just drag and drop a text box. Please note I'm using an ASP.NET control. I'm going to just drag and drop a text box there. Okay, let me finish the design, then I'll show you the code what is generated. I'll say enter second number, and here also I'll put a text box. The next one is I need a button which will submit it. So I'll just keep it here. I'm not going to keep a reset button. That's up to you. Okay, just to get the work done. Now, this is my design. I finished the design without even writing one line of code because I know I can just drag and drop and just change the properties, right? So now, I've dragged and dropped the controls. These are not controls, these are just labels. So I'll not talk to them at all. There are only 3 controls which I need to bother about here. Okay, 2 text boxes and 1 button. Let me go to the source. Okay, I hope you can see this. First row, first column is just enter first number. Nothing else is put there. Next one, inside the second column, you see there's a text box. But please note it is an ASP text box, not a HTML text box, which means it will be converted to HTML when I run this program. Okay. Similarly, second number ASP text box. That also is done. Last one is a button which is also an ASP.NET button. Okay, so with this in mind, let's go to our design once again. I'm not done with this yet. Okay, so first thing is, this is text box 1. Okay, and if I am dragging and dropping something onto the design, you should also understand that these are all components. What you see on the toolbox side, all these are components which I'm dragging and dropping, which means the one which I dragged and dropped is an object. Okay, if it is an object, it also has methods, properties and events. So what I'm going to do is, number one, I'm going to change its properties. Okay, let's change that properties. Let's click on F4 or just tap F4. You will find okay, you will find there are a lot of properties there of that particular text box. The first thing I am going to do is to make sure that I give ID. Okay, I'll just zoom there. The ID of the text box is text box 1. I'm going to name it as txt first. This is the ID of my first text box. Please note this does not work with respect to HTML tags. HTML tags are not considered as objects. Okay, they are just HTML tags. Here, these controls are components, which means they'll be considered as objects, and this is the object name. Now, one more thing I'm going to change here is the name, the text, what is there. If you want the default value to be print there. Okay, I'm not going to keep any of those. I'm just going to leave it as it is. I'll go to the second one, second text box. Let me go to its properties and let me change its ID also. I'll name it as txt second. Done. Okay, the last one is the button. Let me go to the properties. I'll name it as btn submit or btn add, whatever you want to give. And I'll change the text of that button to add numbers. That's it. So I have a web page which is designed. Design is done without writing much lines of code. We have just done the design. You take 2 numbers from the user and you click on that submit button. That's all. Now, let me just run the program as it is. Nothing. I've not done any logic here. Just the design. Okay, let's run this page and see what output comes to us in the browser. Okay, in the meantime, let me keep the source open for you so that you can see what is here and what is coming to the browser is not the same. It is going to get parsed, compiled, and then comes to you as a HTML, plain HTML. It comes to you. Let's see. Okay, a window is opening now, and let's see what comes. I'm going to keep it like this so that you can see the code this side as well as the output, which is coming here in Chrome. Okay, just bear with me for 2 minutes. I'll finish this soon. Yes. Okay. So now you see that there are questions like this. There's a simple page designed. Enter first number, you enter something, enter second number, put something, and then click on add numbers. That's all. We didn't write any code for this. We just dragged and dropped, and the controls are ready. Let me also right click and say view page source, because here if you see the text box is ASP colon text box, but the browser will not understand ASP colon text box. So let me just click on view page source, and let me just scroll down. Okay, let me ignore all these extra things. Let me come to the table part. Okay, please note the table, style, width, everything is there. TR, TD, class, everything is as it is from here. If there is HTML there, it will never be converted. In other words, HTML need not be translated because your browser will understand as it is. So HTML is not translated, but this line between this TD and this TD is not understood by your browser. But please note what did come back to my browser. Okay, please note it is mentioning as ASP colon text box, but what came back to the browser is input name equal to txt first, type equal to text, ID is equal to txt first. I hope you follow. Okay, .NET has converted that into plain HTML, which your system can understand. Let me go ahead. Second one, input name equal to txt second, ID equal to txt second, type equal to text. What about the button, ASP colon button? What did it convert into? It converted into input type equal to submit, name equal to btn submit, value is equal to add numbers, ID equal to btn submit. It converted everything into HTML so that what you see here is plain HTML, nothing out of the blue. Okay, that's it. Now if I click on add numbers, what would happen? Nothing. It just refreshes the page because please note, even without me adding a form tag there, a form is automatically added here. Form post action is equal to what file? Same file, default.aspx. Same file is called once again. I hope till this it is clear. Now let's just finish the logic. It's very simple. What do you want to do when you click on that button? When you click on this button, I would like you to take the two numbers from the user, add it and print it to the user. That's all. Okay. So how do I do that? Those who have done VB will understand this. I can just double click on it. Okay, which means when you click on this button, you want something to happen. Okay, so let me go to its properties. You also find there are properties as well as there are events for that control. Okay, let me click on events. There are very few events which are possible. Let me ignore all these things. I only want click. So I can either double click here or I can double click here. Okay, so it's your wish. Let me do the simplest way. Just double click on the button. Now, you see, when you double click on the button, it takes me to the C# part. Okay, so in the C# part, what do you have? You have a small method being created. Okay, a small method is being created. Now also, again, I would like to go back to that code and see what is there in that ASP colon button. I hope you can see the code. ASP colon button run at server, and also one more extra parameter has been added. On click is equal to call this method. What is that method? The method which just got created, btn submit underscore click. It's a C# method. It is linked here in your HTML based code. So you click on this, I'll call this block of code. What am I going to do in this block of code? Very simple. I'm going to create int a is equal to, what do you want? I want you to take whatever is there in that txt first. You know that that's the name of my control, right? I can just call that name of the control and then say dot text. Whatever is typed in that text box. But please note, it returns a string. Not only .NET, even in Java you would have done this. In Android you did this. Okay, in PHP you would have done this. Okay, whatever comes from the user is basically text, but if you would like to convert them into integer, you will have to write your own code. So let's write that also. How do I fix this error? I just need to make sure that it comes inside int dot parse txt first dot text. I got the value of a here. Now int b is equal to int dot parse txt second dot text. Done. This is done. Simple one. The next one is int c, or the sum, is equal to a plus b. You've got the output. You just need to print it out. You can just write, right now I'm using response dot write. It's like alert, not alert actually. Just to print it on the browser, I can just say response dot write. Response is the class which has an inbuilt static method called write. You can just print the sum is, and I'll concatenate that with the sum. Done. Our work here is done. You can even print it into a label. You can call that label and then print it out, which we'll see extensively later. But let me just run the program now and see whether it works. Okay, so now the program is running once again. It's getting compiled once again. Please note I've changed the code, which means compilation also gets happening. Okay, so now I have the method and two numbers here. Let me just put 25, 25, and let me click on add numbers. You get the output as the first line because response.write, it's printed onto the response along with whatever is there. Sum is 50. Okay, so this is how .NET works. It's much more simpler when you develop complicated applications. The design is separate, code is separate. It might be easier for you to start developing in .NET than any other language which you have come across so far. Okay, so with this I'll stop, guys. In the next class we'll continue with ASP.NET.